Welcome to the Xceptional Insights podcast. I'm Sean Wargo, and I'm joined by my colleague, Peter Hansen.
Hello.
Together, we make up the market intelligence team here at Avixa,
Where it's our job to identify trends in the economy and understand how they affect our industry, the professional audiovisual industry.
Hello and welcome back to our Xceptional Insights podcast. This is Peter Hansen and Sean Wargo. Happy to be back actually in person for the first time after, a long period of quarantine, not able to interact with each other face to face. I think this might be the first time I've seen you in I don't know, quite a while.
Years.
Years, that's right. Well, we've got a great topic today. We have been looking at data that's really showing a pronounced shift towards distribution, the channel, essentially for Pro AV. One of the things that we looked at is we had supply chain constraints. We knew there was difficulty for companies to get product, and so they were relying more and more on distributors through the pandemic to do so. We actually did a measurement on that. We hadn't done it since 2018 really, was when the data came in, that showed that we have actually seen that pronounced shift in the amount of revenue generated through distribution and channel versus direct. So what the data said to us, back in 2019, 50% of revenues were generated from direct sales. So essentially product flowing from manufacturer right to the end customer. That has shifted now to only 10% of revenues. So 1/5 of the sales going through distribution. As we said, a lot of reasons for that, supply chain being the biggest among them. But there's many other things that may have contributed, expanding product portfolios, a need to find substitutes, part of the supply chain story, but also a need for integrator installers to diversify their skill sets. So here's the question for us that we're going to talk a little bit about today is, do we revert? As we remove that primary benefit that distribution was really providing, do we actually revert back to our previous mode? Do we get back more to like 50% of sales coming through a direct sale? What's your take, Peter? What are you pro reversion?
We've talked about this before, and I think that we're just a little different. I think we both have, some questions about the sustainability, and I think that I'm a little bit more in the camp of drawing back to pre-pandemic norms. And I'll just hit my biggest reason right off the bat. Throughout the pandemic, we covered supply chains, wrote 2 quarterly meta reports about them. And it came up clearly in that, sort of the logic we applied, the logic we looked at, what the data was telling us, and from a different collection methodology, a different approach there, was that it's the right time to look at distribution. And I'll talk about both from the supply side and the demand side there. On the demand side, we have end users, integrators looking to finalize projects, and they face 2 big challenges. The obvious one is, of course, they call up their manufacturer and say, I'd like these products, and the manufacturer says, great, 6 months from now. Which is, of course, if you're trying to complete a project, really difficult, especially because we know that 6 months doesn't mean 6 months. It means like maybe you get it soon. A lot of manufacturers surprised clients getting things earlier, but then also a lot of deadlines were missed. In addition, that the second challenge that end user, that integrator is dealing with is they're strapped for time. Especially last year when supply chain issues peaked, probably in the summer of 2022, they were really understaffed as revenue came roaring back, return to in-person, amidst a really tight, wider economic labor market globally, most countries, most major economies at least. So they didn't have the ability to say, hey, Sheila, why don't you spend the next 6 hours calling around different manufacturers to see who can get us, screens in the next week. They wanted to be able to call one person and get what they needed, and as well, figure out too, okay, we can't get the same, control system that we've been relying on. What are the alternatives that we can get within the next week or two. And if we do have that, what does that mean for the rest of our system? And if we are changing the whole system, what does that mean for supporting it? What does that mean for end users? What are the trade-offs of that? And so an expert who knows multiple manufacturers, who knows what the trade-offs are, who's been talking to lots of people facing the same issues, who can save you all that time, all of a sudden you see this value add. And that's the demand side where it's like, why not go to this person? Let's talk to the supply side real quick. If you're a supplier and traditionally you've done direct-to-consumer sales, think about the costs involved in that. You have to have a much larger sales staff as you talk to all these individual accounts. You have to have a much larger logistics team as you manage lots and lots of smaller sales. Now, in 2018, having those teams helped increase your sales because there are people who wanted to buy that way, who mostly did direct purchasing, and that was helpful. That could boost your sales. Now talk about a supply restricted. You're going to sell all of your product. You're 6 months delayed or 3 months delayed. You don't have to market to individual integrators to get it done. You can just say, hey, distribution partner, 1, 2, 3 distribution partners, we'll ship you, truckloads. You have one salesperson. It's really simple. I'm exaggerating, but even on the supply side, manufacturers able to save a lot of time, money, effort, charge a lower price up front, and just go all through distribution. So it's these both sides in this environment where the market is clearing all the available equipment. The buyers don't have the time to call a bunch of people, learn a bunch of new availability, technical specs, trade-offs, processes. So I see that as a really big reason that's disappearing right now. So if that's disappearing, that big distributor advantage, I see it has to kind of shift back. What do you think?
Well, so all great points. I think so. The question really at the core of this, right, is there additional value provided by distribution beyond just supply chain management? Absolutely true that in a supply constrained situation, a distributor is going to be better able to look across brands, products, substitutes of all types, right, and or redirect into a whole nother category. So that makes complete sense. Warehousing, those sorts of things. Some of that might be sticky, right? If the distributor through that effort, through the pandemic, also sort of train the channel that, look, we're a better place to handle warehousing. We know there's going to be ebbs and flows of product. We can help the market kind of deal with those issues. So we're a bigger buyer. We have logistics. We can store all that. So a manufacturer would have to worry about that less. They also would potentially get the cost savings of not having to deal with the customer and building the supply, the sales effort, the customer service effort to kind of support the market. Integrator obviously does some of that, but distributor can take on some of that load too. The question becomes, distribution during the pandemic also enabled the channel, the integrator, to expand to new areas. We know core business models were challenged during the pandemic. The business that you used to do of installing hardware in large conference rooms, in classrooms, was challenged. It was more remote work. You had to build new skills, probably start considering new product sets. One of the things in IOTA that we've tracked through the years, obviously, is the rise of back-end infrastructure type technologies, media servers, storage devices, networking hardware, all those sorts of things. So AV providers had to shift what their competency. Arguably, a distributor, especially now that we've seen a lot of convergence in distribution, where you got a lot more IT products, AV products through one source of distribution, that keeps potentially some stickiness, right? The distributor can say, yep, not only do we handle supply chain ebbs and flows for you, but we're also able to help you branch into new product categories. We're able to give you new skills that you weren't able to offer before. Maybe it's supporting back-end systems a little bit better. Or maybe it's something like more obvious, like going into digital signage or product category, essentially solutions that you hadn't considered. So those are the things that I would say possibly, right? The distributor's in a position to reinforce position beyond just the waning need for supply chain mitigation
Right.
into other forms of skill set expansion.
Yeah.
One thing I would wonder that I'd be curious to your thoughts on is just this notion of risk mitigation in general. Are we in an environment maybe where, as we've been challenged with over the last, it seems like every time we turn the corner, right, there's another threat looming, whether it's global conflicts, supply chain issues, recession threats. Is there other things that we should be thinking about that help from the risk mitigation side for distribution?
Yeah. Yeah. Risk mitigation is absolutely a really big part of the advantage of distribution. We can talk about the biggest integrators, and they're billion-dollar companies.
Right.
And that's small potatoes compared to the biggest distributors, right? So another big advantage of distributors is their ability to support managed services. Now, managed services is a risky proposition for an integrator. And I don't mean that as like, this is some big scary thing. What I mean is the cost structure of it is such that you don't take all the money up front, with your margin, et cetera. You sort of have this guaranteed profit. What you do is you make some calculation, and hopefully you do it right, where you guarantee a price and certain level of support, and then that could hit or miss, right? So that's what I mean. But it's risky. And when you have risk, company size is a key variable, and the bigger the company size is, the smaller a given contract, the smaller that risk is. A managed services contract that could be, sink or swim for a mid-sized integrators, it would be laughable for the biggest distributors, right? So there's a value add of a distributor. We'll take on a lot of some of the portfolio risk of a managed services contract. With the pricing, we'll take that out of your integrator hands because we can afford it. Probably as well because we've run managed services contracts a lot more.
Right.
And then it'll be more comfortable for you. I'll give you another one on the risk side too, is interest rates. We see interest rates going up a lot. This is one of the biggest economic phenomena of the past 2 years, meaning higher upfront costs. That's also pushing more companies towards managed services as they want to avoid those financing costs, turn them into operating expenditures over time. And that's another place where bigger company, lower risk, better interest rates, just another small advantage for the distributors, and one that's coming in now. Now, a good point that you make is about sort of like the stickiness, right? Because part of my reasoning about reversion is, okay, we hit this like high watermark, I would say, in terms of like advantage for distribution for pure supply logistics, just getting the equipment that you need and everything that's involved, the knowledge of how to work it, like, et cetera, sales, searching, et cetera. So part of my logic is, in order to keep the same level of distribution, there needs to be the same level of advantage for distribution going forward. Now, that's not quite true, right? Because there's a startup shift to it, right? Like, I'm not going to try and gain 0.5% if it's going to cost me a lot of, like, I have to spool up an entire new sales department and, like, buy a bunch of trucks and buy a warehouse and to get, like, a tiny percent of new revenue. Like, there's 1,000 ways a company can make more money. And that's probably not a good investment, right? If it's like a really tiny marginal difference with significant fixed costs. So it's not clear to me that, that sort of like has to be a one-to-one advantage. Like the 2022 advantage of distribution the scale of that has to be matched in 2027 for it to be robust. But I do see that sort of like high watermark coming down on the logistics side. And I do wonder about those advantages. What other advantages are there for a distribution that we haven't talked about yet? I know I have a couple in mind.
Yeah,
but
you touched on one just a second ago that also it's linked to managed service. So AV as a service or essentially lease models, financing models, right, is another area. So in a high interest rate environment, I could see where credit management, working with an integrator to potentially shift their business more to a lease or an AV as a service model through managed services is a key component. So I would double down on that part. The fact that a distributor is in a better position to help with financing concerns and issues.
Yeah.
We've heard the term too that just in time is sort of dead now, given what, and I think what that really means to me is what the pandemic did is exposed weakness throughout the logistics chain. It's yes, the integrator installer, they just can't afford to sit on product, right? They don't have the ability to really warehouse. It's a burden on balance sheet. They're then they overspend to try to avoid a future situation where they don't have a key component, but that just ends up being too expensive to them. On the manufacturing side, they too need to clear out inventory. They can't hold the inventory once the factory has produced. It's like, let's get it out the door. So pushing that through distribution allows for the ebbs and flows, I think, to be managed better. And so it exposed what was already a weakness in a sense. Individual parts of the value chain doing a service that they weren't optimized to be able to do, feeling the cost and effects of that. And so it kind of exposed, and therefore the market has shifted. So that creates that kind of a stickiness. But
And-
here's the thing. Can distributors universally kind of offer all of these benefits? Did some of them ride the coattails of, there was supply constraints, and so they benefited and the market shifted? Absolutely. And so some amount of reversion you could see as possible. And I think our data as we look out to 28 is a little bit coming back to direct.
Some,
it's points. It's not a lot. And similarly, I think what gets squeezed is potentially more of the what we call a one step, where it's manufacturer direct to a reseller, and then on that might get constrained a little bit more, pushed towards either a direct or to a distribution model. So I guess that's part of the question is how much reversion would we reasonably expect? Is it big movement, small movement, those kinds of things?
And I'll make a couple points to build on that. One is, if you talk to a distributor, we're taking a lot of distributor perspective here. It's a little bit pro-distribution, and there's a lot of perspectives out there. But if you talk to a distributor, one thing they'll say is, the integrators in the pandemic, what they realized, like, dang, we really are spending a lot of money on logistics. Like, we shifted distribution, and we realized, like, wow, we really can save a lot more money than we thought. We didn't realize how many hidden costs there were involved in not using distribution and going direct to manufacturers. Now, take that for what you will. I'm parroting something that we've heard talking to distribution. Now I'm gonna hit two quick further advantages of distributors before talk a little bit more, some of the details about the numbers. A couple of questions I have for you about them. Now, one advantage for distributors is you mentioned this a little bit. Some of the mergers in the market. We're also seeing some sort of non-AV players come into the market, so they're bringing outside industry advantages. Maybe they're more on the security side. Maybe they're more on the IT side, right? So as we see AV converge with these different markets, they're offering this advantage of prior existing expertise, prior existing sales relationships, manufacturer relationships. That's an advantage. How big is it? We can discuss, but it's an advantage. Another one I'll say is the uncertainty of the corporate office market is a big push towards managed services. It's this open question. I mean, we're doing research on it every year about, what does the 2028 corporate office market look like? It's an open question, right? And so it makes sense to say have a managed service contract. And I know of distributors out there who are literally offering the corporate office subscription service where you pay the distributor, they work with an integrator partner, and you just have, a la Microsoft Office Suite, you have the current updates for the cost of your license or for the cost of your subscription. And that makes a lot of sense in such an uncertain environment. where, in 2018 we could say, hey, like we did with this room that we're in right now, we know the general structure of what conference room needs to look like for this usage. We can make a commitment, put down the upfront cash, and be happy with it for a decade, 20 years, without, with tech upgrades, keeping up, but without having to restructure, the whole camera setup or the whole audio setup. And that's not the case right now. I mean, maybe you guessed right, but that's another place for a distributor to be advantaged, kind of be that clearinghouse of knowledge about what are the best practices, how are companies doing it.
Yeah, let me pick up on that thread because I agree with you. One of the questions in the marketplace right now is about replacement, refresh cycles. It used to be, as you just described, it's like we build a conference room. It was a 7-year cycle. It's like you put it in, you touch back with the customer, maybe year 5, 6, kind of saying, hey, how are things going? Let's look at a refresh for your room. But what we've seen, as you just described with Office Space, we're in a mode of more experimentation. We've heard the phrase perpetual beta, right? Where companies are kind of experimenting with different approaches. It's an evolving landscape. They're kind of finding the right balance between in-office days, at-home days, remote days, et cetera. So that's creating an environment where they may have to invest more frequently to kind of adapt to changing requirements. Distribution could help through that, obviously, because they can help manage through, as we said, managed services, kind of a constant relationship with the customer, a shorter refresh cycle that we may be kind of seeing. I've heard some out there saying, no, actually technology now, we've gotten to a fairly standardized place. We know what to put in a conference room. We know how to accommodate for remote connection and all that sort of stuff. So replacement cycles are still fairly long. But the challenge to that is we have things like AI coming. We have, new modes of managing a camera in a room. Versus instead of front of room, it's now in the center of the room and able to kind of switch and focus on specific speaker. So all that kind of stuff argues for maybe a more frequent look at the technology.
Yeah.
And so that could put it back. It could solidify the distributor kind of advantage in the market as they help an integrator kind of think through replacement, refresh, life cycle of product, kind of offering upgrade paths for them, managing through that, contracting appropriately for it, looking at staffing requirements. So it's another kind of plus in the distribution camp.
Yeah. And before we wrap, there's a point I want to make too about kind of the accounting, really, and pricing for distribution, because a question that we definitely get is, so we're all going to go to distribution. Does that mean we're all just going to pay higher prices going forward?
Right.
I mean, if you kind of look at the actual numbers in IOTA, it's distribution is how much is it? 40.
It's about 26%.
26%. In total billions, it's a meaningful number. Of new money that shift to distribution represents. But when you actually get down to brass tacks, right, you realize that that's sort of just a shift in where those dollars are appearing. So part one is on the manufacturer side, the price for manufacturer that is selling at when they're selling direct to consumer, and they have all the sales staff to support that, all the logistics staff to support that, is a higher price than when they're exclusively selling direct to distribution. So there's part of that, that's now being realized. Those logistics and sales support are now value add, in quotes, part of the distribution. It now is a clear price markup, but actually it's a price markup that was shift from that manufacturer sales price now into the distribution sales price.
Right.
So it's not a net gain, it's just a shift. And it's possibly a net decrease if the distributor is doing it more efficiently than the manufacturer was. And on the end user side too, the end user, maybe they were used to be buying from, 10 different manufacturers because they're buying direct on, to outfit a whole room or suite of rooms. And now they're just buying from the distributor. So they need to have, less management of warehousing this, storing that, time is a little wonky because this comes in today, that comes in tomorrow, that comes in next week. It all comes in today because you have one single partner. So it, again, is now it's on the books as a distribution value add cost. But what you're doing is you're taking it off of the books of an end user who is spending, or an integrator who is spending on warehousing and staff time. So just because there's these like billions of dollars that are all of a sudden poof here on the books for distribution, it doesn't mean that it has gotten more expensive to do AV because of distribution. Part of what it is definitely just concentrating certain types of work from kind of the ends of the supply chain, the end user end, the manufacturer end, and putting together in the distribution end.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, it's a fair note that some of this is transference. Some of it, so there's a cost efficiency to that. Like moving it from one place to another does give us a little bit of efficiency in the market. Where you would expect to perhaps see that play itself out is maybe pricing is able to stabilize a little bit more at the manufacturer level because they're shifting costs up into distribution. But at the same time, and distribution realizes efficiencies from that, but they also have the opportunity to extract a little bit more value for it. Yeah. So yeah, it's probably a little give and take. So some of the additional revenue and growth for our industry comes from that additional markup. That's for sure. The applied additional value that the channel offers as it flows through integration. But it's absolutely a fair point that it's somewhat moving dollars around because if you're an end user and you're relying more on an integrator, well, then you don't have to rely on headcount as much to do that same work. Yeah. So absolutely true. Yeah. And the percentage actually, just to put it to make sure we clarify, it's 49% in our latest number is a two-step. So involving a distributor at some point in the product journey. So that's a substantial increase over the 23 of the past. And I think we're both saying that. And I will offer too, one thing I forgot to mention up front, some of this is nuance of how we define the product, the industry now. As we talked about, there's a lot more IT-related product that's coming into
and IT is so distribution focused.
Absolutely, and resale focused through companies like CDW for media server type technologies. So yes, some of it is a methodologic composition shift in our industry towards products that were more involving a channel. Than perhaps past. So we do see some. So I wanted to caveat that. Yeah. But I think we're both agreeing at the end that there is the challenge. The gauntlet's been thrown down. Yeah. Right? The distributors in our market have earned customer through the pandemic, and now they have to keep it. So proving sustained value, proving sustained benefit to the marketplace is going to be advantage. Is going to be important if they hope to keep it. And I would say offering to the distributors out there, it's rising to that challenge. Yeah. But naturally, some of that will revert. I think let's call it 3 to 5 points that goes back either in a couple of places back to distribution or back to direct or more to distribution. I think is a fair estimate. Yeah. Does that sound reasonable to you?
Definitely. If you're saying the over under is 4, I'd take the over. But it's a good question. It's going to be a good tug of war. Who can be the most efficient? Who can deliver the best results for end users? It's the age-old question.
Sounds good. Well, great conversation. Thanks for joining us today. I think that wraps up our conversation around distribution. Join us next time as we explore a little bit about the growth opportunity for Pro AV, the $100 billion, and where we end up and where that comes from. Look forward to seeing you then.